centering around the future of the government's $10 billion housing fund. Joining us live from Canberra now is the Greens housing spokesperson, Max Chandler-Mather. Max, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So the government's made some changes to its housing fund, most notably a guarantee that a minimum $500 million per year will be paid from that fund from 24-25 onwards. That's even if the investment returns aren't there. So is that enough to bring you on board?
Well, all the government have done is close a glaring loophole that could have seen no money spent in any given year. But to be frank, they haven't addressed the two key concerns the Greens have put again and again for 8 months, which is firstly, more guaranteed funding for public and affordable housing. We started with $5 billion a year. We halved our offer to $2.5 billion a year. And $1 billion on the table to incentivise a national freeze on rent increases. Let's be clear, what the government are proposing is not to spend any money for 12 months' time and then only $500 million, not index it for 6 years, so lock in real term cuts for 6 years and not build a single home until 2025. That is not a response to the worst housing crisis this country has faced in generations.
Okay, so you're not going to support it then?
Well, we want to keep negotiating with the government in good faith, but our frustration is they're not budging on our two key issues. I mean, let's bottom line here. There are millions of renters across this country right now, 1 or 2 rent increases away from eviction or serious financial stress. They get nothing out of this. For the 640,000 families waiting for social and affordable housing right now, many of them may well be waiting 10, sometimes 20 years to get into a public or affordable home, or may never get one.
Okay, well,
in a wealthy country like Australia...
Are you now standing in the way of those 30,000 new affordable homes being built?
Well, not a single home, as a result of the dodgy way this fund is set up, is going to be built until 2025. And can we just put this into perspective? The government's own body has said to tackle the housing crisis, we need $15 billion of investment in public and affordable housing every year. So the Greens proposed a compromise of a third of that, $5 billion a year. We then halved that to $2.5 billion a year and reduced the amount of money we wanted on the table for a national freeze on rent increases. And the government still hasn't been able to shift. But at the same time, they're going to guarantee $30 billion a year for the stage 3 tax cuts. They're locking in over $500 billion worth of spending on the nuclear attack submarines. And they can't come to the table on $2.5 billion a year on public and affordable housing in the worst crisis we've seen in generations.
Sure. The rent freeze and the rent caps, though, I mean, that's just not going to get done because the states aren't going to go for it. So, you know, do you have to give up on that one? It's just not in play.
Well, to be clear, many states and territories froze rents during the pandemic, including states like
That was
Victoria.
temporary, though.
And by the way, of course, in an emergency situation like we are in right now, we're not proposing a permanent freeze on rent increases. We're proposing a 2-year freeze on rent increases just to give wages a chance to catch up to rents. Let's also be clear, what we're proposing is the federal government put $1 billion on the table. It would be a brave premier who turned to their people and said, we're going to turn down hundreds of millions of dollars extra in housing funding because we don't want to stop your rents going up for the next few years. It's not sustainable in this country to have unlimited rent increases when we already know that millions of renters right now are doing it really tough. I door-knocked a pensioner over the weekend who'd already had a $200 a week rent increase and said if there was an extra $1 in rent increase at the end of his next lease, he'd be on the streets.
Okay.
Now, there are hundreds of thousands of people in that situation.
No doubt. No doubt about that. I spoke to Jackie Lambie about this yesterday, Max. Here's part of what she had to tell me in her interview with First Edition.
The only people holding this up are the Greens. Quite frankly, they should be disgusted in themselves. That's where I'm at with them. And you might want to go and talk to your members while you're out there, you Green machine, because they're not bloody happy with you either. Get this housing through and we can build on it as we're going along.
On that, Max?
Well, we've been door-knocking across the country. Over 80% of people who we talk to have said that we should refuse to pass the bill until Labor come to the table on some of our demands. Now, what Labor have said on this plan is this is their long-term plan to tackle the housing crisis, which means if the Senate locks this in now, they lock in hundreds of thousands of more people waiting for social and affordable housing, absolutely nothing for renters, and a housing fund that locks in real-term cuts every year for 6 years.
There's rent assistance for more than $5 billion in rent assistance, though.
That was what existed under the coalition government, and it's clearly not working. The only change to rent assistance the government proposed was an extra just over $1 a day for the small few renters who do get rent assistance. 5.5 million renters don't get anything from rent assistance.